Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter and Andrei Martyanov. We got a lot of important things to discuss. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Scott Ritter and Andrei Martyanov. We got an hour and got a lot of important things to talk about, so we're going to get right to it. Before we get going, don't forget, go to scottritter.com. That's Scott Ritter's website, and you can find all of his good works there, and you can donate. Don't forget, Scott's got bills to pay and things to do, so make sure you donate. Andrei has a great YouTube channel, Smoothie X12. Just look up Andrei Martyanov. Everybody knows about it. So it's a great. And what's the name of your website again? Your blog, Andrei?
Reminiscence of the Future. It's still Smoothie X12 at blogspot.com anyway. So
there we go. Andrei always laughs about that, but that is like the coolest name. I always think, man, I wish I'd have thought of something like that. That is so cool. At any rate, let's get going. A lot of big things going on. Andrei, BRICS. Couple of big stories out of that, not the least of which being that India and China seem to be burying the hatchet on their border. The Iranians, there's some discussions. I've heard rumored that they're going to be building, Su-35s or 30s or something. I don't know. Anyway, your thought, BRICS. What's the big story, Andrei, that you get out of BRICS?
Oh, I mean, it's not final, it's formalization, it's de jure in some sense, de jure emergence of the alternative platform to the United Nations and to it's multipolar world. It's not unipolar anymore. It's just kind of, wraps it up and says, yeah, here we are. We have this power pole, we have that power pole, we have the third power pole, we have, other organizations and associations associated with those power poles. And, we have to keep in mind that out of 4 largest economies, 3 largest world economies have been at BRICS. Okay, so it's like, yeah, don't go, I am on record for the last 10 years and said, don't even come up to me with all this nonsense of the European Union, and which are by separate, they are basically, pipsqueaks, economy-wise. They can still produce some things which are, of course, of value, like, civilian aircraft and, even, that third-rate or third world country now, which is United Kingdom, it still continues to produce Rolls-Royce engines, which are critical for example, civilian and military aviation. So, but other than that, you look at the scale of the thing and the events, yeah, that's what we have now. We have now completely alternative platform for people who do not want to be dominated by the whatever we have now in the United States, and the West, and that happened. Everybody thought it would never happen, but it did happen, and I still have to dedicate a pretty significant chunk of time to go over those, 134 points of the final declaration, and it's just like, oh my God. And Putin's press conference, obviously, which he, as usually, did masterfully, and so.
2 quick things, Andrei, before we jump to Scott, and that is, since you have friends and family still in Russia, the 2 things that they're saying on the news here, or that we're starting to see. Number 1, the North Koreans are in there just fighting away along with the Russians. They always imply that the Russians are weak and they got to get help. Number 1. Number 2, the rumor all over the place that the Iranians have gotten some kind of an agreement or a deal with Russia to build Su-30s and Su-35s. What say you about those 2 rumors or propaganda points, whatever you want to call them?
Well, Koreans are propaganda. First, we have to keep in mind there are many Russian soldiers and officers who have Asiatic outlook. They look like Koreans, they look like Yakuts, they look like Buryats and all kinds of people. So, this whole, hustle around North Korea is very simple. Kiev and especially Europeans, they want to officially internationalize the conflict in order to have their, kind of justification for put some boots on the ground in the Western Ukraine, which Russia already stated. And so for them they can do only PR. Militarily, there are nobodies there, but, they want to say, okay, you see, Russia now uses the North Korean troops. And, now we have the official kind of sort of moral justification to use officially our troops on the ground in Ukraine, which, of course, Kiev regime desperately wants. So that's pretty much it. There's nothing more to it, nothing less. Could there be some officers and some small units of North Koreans to gain combat experience? Oh, absolutely. You definitely can have company-sized force, which needs to be obviously trained properly and integrated in the command and control structure of the Russian military and the special military operation. So you can have that, no doubt about it. So, but other than that, it's just preposterous. As per Iran, Iran is a pretty advanced nation. At some point of time they had problem with Iran because they have the oversupply of their PhDs in physics and in mathematics, and engineering. So many people do not know that Iran produces actually, it's the fourth entity which produces the long-range air defense complexes. And they even produce their own cars for all we care. So I wouldn't be surprised, considering the vector of the Russian-Iranian relations, which go towards the comprehensive, essentially military, political, and economic alliance, that at some point of time, they might start, licensing out the Su-30SM-2, most likely, or Su-35. I'm absolutely not going to be surprised. Russians will come in, will build or help to rearrange the facilities such a way that they can do appropriate, quality control and things of this nature. And sure, in the end, it's still most of the elements of those combat aircraft will be sourced out from Russia, especially avionics and things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised.
Scott, all of that, and also throwing it back out there, BRICS. As I said, I think that the beginning of a rapprochement between India and China on their border issues is a significant issue. But your thoughts on the big story that you see coming out of BRICS, and if you wanted to comment on the other things, that's fine too.
Well, it's interesting to be looking at BRICS from a Western perspective and seeing the Western spin on things. The number one story is in the West is, oh my God, Putin's not isolated like we wanted him to be. Newsflash. But that's not what BRICS is about. Number two story, de-dollarization, oh, look, BRICS isn't ready to do that. That's a failure. De-dollarization is not something that BRICS is pushing. It's a byproduct of, as Putin said, that we didn't decide not to use the dollar. You decided not to let us use the dollar. And so we have no choice but to find something else, and we're still working on it. Things of this nature. And if I said the Bandung conference, nobody in America, hardly anybody in America will know what I'm talking about. They go, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about a major conference that took place in Indonesia in 1955, the Bandung Conference. It was a gathering of Asian and African countries, basically rejecting, colonialism, rejecting, the colonial era. And it was a big deal back then. And Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier at the time, said that this conference will lead to the end of colonialism in 20 years. And he was right. But then we have a problem called neocolonialism. And that is, of course, one way of talking about the rules-based international order and what the United States has imposed on. This BRICS conference that took place in Kazan is the modern-day equivalent of Bandung. This is the end of neocolonialism. This is the end of the rules-based international order. That's what happened. In the West, we're still talking about, the isolation of Putin and, and then we focus on things. I'm not saying that the Chinese-Indian rapprochement is not a big deal. Of course it's a big deal. But it was inevitable because BRICS is designed not to have member nations fighting amongst one another. And so this was going to happen. it's not a shock. But the West doesn't realize is that we lost. We haven't come to grips with that. We're still thinking we're number one, and we woke up this morning and we're number two, distant two as a block. BRICS has passed us. What happened in Kazan is a historic event. It's the modern. I use Bandung. A lot of people talk about Bretton Woods, and this is as important as But Bretton Woods was about economics, that link to the dollar. So when you use the Bretton Woods analogy, you put a lot of emphasis on the dollar. Getting rid of the dollar is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to happen, but it isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of coordination. The bad news for the dollar is that BRICS is in the process of moving in that direction. And again, it's not because they want to. I mean, to be honest, if I were an advisor to Donald Trump, if he's going to win this election, or Kamala Harris, if she wins it, the first thing I'd say is, if you want to save the dollar, immediately release Russian sovereign wealth, pay them back all the interest you stole, and stop sanctions, lift sanctions. If you do this, they won't be able to form the BRICS currency, because the strength of the dollar, the allure of the dollar, will keep everybody attached to the dollar. If you want to maintain control over the world, keep the dollar viable. But if you want to guarantee that BRICS succeeds in creating this alternative currency, then keep doing what you're doing. And unfortunately, in America, we don't know how to do anything different than what we've done. So this is not just the new Bretton Woods. This is the new Bandung. This is a transformational period in history that we in the West don't comprehend, because we look at everything from a Western-centric point of view. If you go to India and say Bandung, they know exactly what you're talking about. If you go to Indonesia, they know exactly. You go to Africa, exactly. Asia, exactly. All those nations that are joining up now as the new partner states, they know what Bandung is, and they're proud to be part of the new Bandung. So that's my take on BRICS. We in the West aren't going to be able to comprehend what happened until it's far too late. In the military, we use there's John Boyd's OODA loop, the decision-making cycle, and you don't want to be on the reactive end of the OODA loop, because then the enemy's in your decision-making cycle. The BRICS nations are inside the decision-making cycle of the G7, of the United States, of Europe, of NATO, and we don't even realize it. We don't even realize we're in a dogfight, and yet they've already come in and made the initial maneuver. And by the time we realize it and we try to snap in response, we'll be shot down. That's what happened here. This is a decisive defeat for the collective West, and we don't even realize it yet. On Korea, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on my history here, but the North Korean army that fought against against the United States and NATO in the 1950s, many of them fought in the Soviet army during World War II, and many of them fought in the communist. There's over 7.3 million Koreans who are Russian citizens. There's a huge Korean diaspora in Russia.
Yeah, diaspora is huge.
My wife, she grew up in Sukhumi, Georgia, and she kept saying, hey, my friend from high school, he's working at down in Corning, New York, and we need to go down there and meet him. I haven't seen him since high school. I really want to see him. I'm like, okay, cool. Got there, he's Korean. And when we walked in, I'm like, this has got to be the wrong guy. Nope, Korean. His father was Korean, but they're Soviet. He speaks fluent Russian. So the idea that somebody can take photographs of Koreans in Russian uniform and put it, I do agree, if there's going to be strategic military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, that you can have North Korean observers embedded doing things. What you will not have is North Korean combat units. First of all, Russia's a professional military fighting force. I would never want to go to war with another army I've never trained with. We don't have joint operation procedure. We have different languages, different everything, different fire control, maneuver concepts. It's the quickest way to guarantee defeat. Two, the quickest way to get the Russian people angry is have foreigners on their soil doing the fighting that the Russians should be doing. The Russian people aren't going to put up with a Korean military presence on their soil to liberate Kursk or to liberate the Donbass. And Russia doesn't need it. That's the other thing. The combat inefficiencies attached to using North Korean combat troops actually weakens Russia. It doesn't mean that the North Koreans can't fight, but they have a different style of fighting. They fight in the North Korean system, which isn't the Russian system. Now, it doesn't mean that in some time in the future you won't see the Russians and North Koreans having joint maneuvers. We saw that with the Russians and the Chinese. They have major maneuvers in Inner Mongolia. One of the reasons is to practice having Russian units commanded by Chinese officers and Chinese units commanded by Russian officers and joint command, so that they know their procedures are the same, so that it's like NATO. That's why you can take a German battalion, unplug it, plug it into an American brigade, and it should be able to function because of commonality of procedures, tactics, equipment, etc. The Russians and the Chinese are working on that. They've been working on that for decades. Russia and North Korea haven't been working on that. And so it's going to take some time before they get to that level. It's absurd in the extreme. I would be shocked to find out that North Korea put 12,000 combat troops on the ground, and I would be shocked.
It's a division. Yeah, it's you can. It's yeah.
I'll tell you what I think is happening here, because I looked at those videotapes. If those are North Korean troops, I can guarantee you two things: they're not special forces, and they're not frontline hardened combat troops. You can just tell by the way people move. Look, I went out. I tried out for a Division I baseball team when I was back in the day, thinking I'm a good baseball player, and I was not bad. But I got on the field, and I watched these guys move with cat-like grace, and I watched them field a ball, and I watched them do that, and I went, "I ain't this. That ain't me." And that was the end of it. I've hung around guys who are combat soldiers who are trained to do it. And they have a certain air about them. What we saw on TV wasn't that. What that looked like was construction battalion guys. And North Korea has promised to send construction battalions to Russia to help reconstruct the Donbass. And Russia has, from my understanding, accepted that. So you may see North Korean construction troops not in combat, but working in the rear to rebuild apartment buildings and things of that nature. And that may be what we're seeing with some of these videos, but those aren't combat troops. That's not how combat troops operate.
North Korean army actually was involved in the construction activity. Forget about civilians. There have been like hundreds of thousands of them, ranging from seasonal workers for the Far East to actually, as Scott correctly stated, what is called straibat in Russian. Yeah, these are construction troops. They do things like, rebuild buildings. They do some communications, ground communications. They do even sometimes, the railroads. So, and this has been happening between North Korea and Russia, even in the toughest times, because essentially what North Korea would do, especially in 90s and 2000s, when they really went through this horrible situation with the famine and things of this nature, they would send those people to Russia to earn money. Russians will get them into this, fairly comfortable barracks. They will have heat, everything, good plumbing and where to sleep. They will be fed, but they will work in the fields and things like that. And the Russian government would pay, obviously, North Korea, including for those, as Scott correctly stated, company battalion size, force, which is essentially engineering corps. That's what it is. They just build things and primarily. So that's what it is.
Scott, Andrei, something else I wanted to move to. So I read the other day, this is an American newspaper, American stuff, propaganda, no doubt. So they say, Zelensky's now moving towards a peace plan. And he said that he wants to make a deal with the Russians where they both agree not to do long-term strikes on energy infrastructure. It's getting cold. I can see where the Ukrainians at any rate. And so they took that, not that the Russians said anything, and they said, now this shows that he's finally being reasonable and moving towards a peace plan. And the first thing I thought was, well, it ain't his decision anyway. You're implying that he has some authority to do anything. Anyway, what's up with that? And take that with, I'm starting to look like it's starting to, I mean, if we're pretty frank, it's looking pretty clear, barring a meteorite strike, Trump's going to win. And there are people in the Trump sphere who want out of Ukraine for whatever reason. Anyway, your thoughts on this crap, and is there any possibility, other than my opinion, unconditional surrender? There ain't no other way this thing ends. Anyway, your thoughts on all of that.
Well,
People thinking about an ending to this thing. Anyway, go ahead, Andrei.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely correct. Zelensky is not decision maker. And we have Mr. Austin just traveling a few days ago back to Ukraine, obviously to state some kind of, in open, they repeat the same mantra, which is no long-range strikes or what have you, use the UAV. Oh, that's all crap, you know. But the point is, obviously, he went there not to do this, you know, press conference. He went there to gauge the, so to speak, situation. And situation is very simple. Nobody wants escalation anymore on NATO part, except for French. They always think they are a big deal, you know, they are not. But the whole idea behind that is to present again some kind of PR action. And don't forget, we are what, 24th of October, right? We're looking at the first probably freeze arriving what, sometime in the early November. And for example, I'll give you the number, 90% of the heat generating facilities, power stations, which work, heat power station, it works on either burning coal or gas or all different kinds of fuels. And so they have been destroyed, you know, so, and now that's obviously completely cut short any ability to whatever they do, repairing. Ukraine doesn't produce anymore, other than on the level of the cottage industry, any kind of the serious weapon. They can take some tank, you know, from there. It's like the dosimeters, you know, the story with the dosimeters. Russians go in, they get those very advanced American dosimeters. I mean, serious, very professional. Why? You know, they get them in the trenches because they have to go and get even the Chernobyl stock of this basically rusty metal, which have been in the storage facility for decades now, in this especially isolated, because they have no tanks, they have no BTRs, they have nothing, and NATO stopped providing them with the armor. So, and that tells you how desperate they are. And now once the freezing starts, it's the issue of the social unrest too, you know? Not that they have been living that well as of lately, for the last year at least, but Russia was methodically destroying these energy generating facilities. And it was for both political and both for military economic sense. And now they have to face this shortage of the heat. And you know what? I'm not going to go into this very much deeper, but for example, breakout of the mains and you know, the plumbing in Kiev. It's normal thing to get the basically fecal lakes and rivers, and it's well documented. It's just the way it is. So Washington went there to see what we can do now, so to speak, to allow face-saving measures. It's too late. As Mr. Putin today's press conference, I had the chance to browse it fast, you know, and he basically repeated all his points that Russia didn't change a thing. If you want to have a decent deal, come to us, you know, we'll talk. But the phrase which constantly being ignored by all those journalists and from the West, this phrase is crucial, considering the realities on the ground. They always omit this as if that doesn't matter. No, this is the key. This is the pivot around which, you know, so what is the reality on the ground? The reality on the ground that they will be kicked out from the left bank of Dnieper, period. That's the reality on the ground. I think so. Kremlin finally made up their decision on terms of Sumy region, I think. And now you have those people from Kharkov area, including the governor. There is a Russian governor of Kharkov area who talks about, okay, time to actually liberate whole thing together with Kharkov. So How far it will go, I don't know. It's in the end, it's for Russia Security Council to decide, but it is clear what is this all about. And again, I want to reiterate this phrase, considering the realities on the ground. The realities on the ground are that actually the front line is disintegrating. I'm looking at the numbers every day. It's just slaughter. I mean, it's just absolute non-stop slaughter of the armed forces of Ukraine and NATO specialists.
And Scott, you're very familiar with the issues of NATO and this discussion of how do they get out of there without saving face. I recall a statement I never forgot. And this was when it came to the Iraq War. And Al Sharpton, of all people, made the statement. But there was a question, and this was the question: how do we get out of Iraq with our dignity? And Al Sharpton said, we lost our dignity when we went in, so we can't get out, right? How do you save face in Ukraine? How do we get out without saving face? We lost face when we went in. There ain't no way to do that. How, Scott, this thing comes to an end at some point. Trump and those people, let's say Trump wins on the 5th. On the 6th, the people in Europe know they're in deep trouble. They know they got problems. Even if he doesn't, I've heard even the Harris people are starting to realize we got to get out of it. Everybody knows they got to get out of this thing. Your thoughts? One other thing with NATO. I was interviewing a person just yesterday who made a good point about NATO's Article 5. And because I said, oh, is NATO over? She said, listen to this. If you read Article 5, it doesn't say you have to get in. It says if something happens, they will, look at what they can do, and each individual state will decide how to respond. And as she said, it could be sending 5 helmets, as Germany did at the beginning, right? So could NATO survive as a theoretical, like, hey, yeah, we're all still in NATO, and if something happens, if we got a couple extra walkie-talkies, we'll send them in theory. But anyway, your thoughts on NATO and this idea of getting out, saving face, when I suspect when it's time to make a deal, Russia's going to reach back in their little, reach over on the desk and say, remember this document we sent you in December of 2021 that said, these are our demands, or there will be a military technical response. They're going to say, just pull it out of your file and read that. That's how you get out of this. Anyway, Scott.
Ironically, I think NATO's best ally right now is BRICS, because one of the themes that was prevalent through BRICS was the desire not to escalate Ukraine, to bring Ukraine to a conclusion and to have no escalation. And from a BRICS standpoint, I think there was the reality is that BRICS respects Russia's position, and they are not going to ask Russia to go back on the territorial acquisition that it's currently made. There are some BRICS members that are not happy with the fact that Russia has annexed, especially Kherson and Zaporizhia. But I think, as Putin has said, the realities on the ground are that. But this notion of
that ship has left the dock. I think they recognize that one.
But the notion of Russia expanding territorial acquisition, I mean, look, I personally believe Russia should take Odessa. I think Russia should take Sumy. I think Russia should take Kharkov. I think that's in Russia's interest. That will be a massive escalation. Whatever peace processes we may be talking about, there's a world of difference between accepting the reality of Russian annexation to date, which is de facto, it's there, it's not going back, and try and get the world to embrace a new level of annexation. And so this is, if I were advising NATO, I would say that we need to bring this conflict to a close as soon as possible in order to retain as much territorial integrity for Ukraine as possible and as much political and economic sovereignty for Ukraine as possible. Denazification doesn't have to mean the end of the Zelensky regime. I mean, I don't think Zelensky survives, but the idea of Russia dictating, the removal of the Ukrainian government, I still think it's possible that this war can end with Ukraine retaining sovereignty. They would have to make some constitutional changes along that which Russia has demanded with the Minsk Accords. I do think Russia goes soft on Banderism. I honestly think that there will be statues of Stepan Bandera in Lvov if they go this route, because BRICS is more important to Russia than strategically defeating Ukraine. Russia just wants what Russia wanted: no NATO in Ukraine and a neutral Ukraine. That's very important, and to retain the territory that is already Russian. Beyond that, there's a lot of maneuver room that'll make a lot of people unhappy. I can read your chats right now. I'm not, but I'm sure people are just, no, Scott, Odessa is Russia, Kharkov is Russia. So I'm not debating with you. I'm just saying that the reality is Putin has to deal with, what was that term? The realities on the ground. That's a two-way street. That's a two-way street.
Can I add something real quick? I'll add something. I read recently, one of the things that Russia was demanding is basically whatever's left of Ukraine, that the rights of the Russian people in whatever's left of Ukraine is respected. So that could address the issues that they may negotiate about, because that's all over Ukraine. So that's what Minsk is. Issue.
That's what Minsk is. That's what the basic. When I said that Russia will insist on that aspect of Minsk, it means making the constitutional changes to protect Russian religion, Russian language, Russian culture, things of that nature, to protect the Russian people. Now, the other thing about NATO is right now you have NATO leaders speaking about this being an existential fight. And therefore they must double down. They must put more money, more goods in there, because we have to stop the Russians from winning. My biggest advice to NATO would be, Russia's won. And what you need to do is stop building a system that's designed to fail. NATO cannot expand. It's incapable of expanding politically and economically. All of these visions they have about building divisions and brigades and all this, it just isn't going to happen. The German economy is tanking. They can't do it. They're going to be shrinking military. The British, I mean, the biggest laugh I had was when I heard that the Brits and the Germans were going to get together in Lithuania and create some sort of joint military force. I was like, really? With what? The Germans can't even get the brigade that they said they're going to put up there, because no German wants to volunteer to serve over country, and their constitution requires that. And the Brits just can't get a brigade. So, what are the Lithuanians going to do? Die?
Oh, God, yeah.
So the fact is, NATO can survive if it accepts the loss in Ukraine and uses the December 2021 negotiating position of Russia to be seen as having a voice, meaning Russia's willing now, I believe, to sit down at the table with NATO, with Europe, to negotiate as equal partners about what a European security framework looks like. Because Russia wants this war to end. Russia's not dying to make this war. They're willing to let this war go on, but Russia would prefer this war ends. And so if you come to the table and mean it, and I think NATO, there is a possibility they could mean it, take the loss in Ukraine, try and preserve as much as you can face saving in Ukraine, and then create a mechanism to talk about a new European security framework. NATO could survive. NATO could survive. But if they continue down this path of existential survival, talking about the absolute necessity to mobilize 300 to 500,000 troops, new brigades and all that, NATO can't afford that. Politically, they can't do it, and it'll be the end of NATO. So we're at one of those inflection points. And that's another thing that I would ask people in the West to do, is read very carefully all the language in the BRICS summit about the Ukraine conflict, Russian language and non-Russian language. And understand, Russia is under a tremendous amount of pressure that if they want to make this consensus-based multilateral system work, that they cannot be in the business of conflict escalation. And all those people out there screaming, we got to go to Odessa, we got to go to Sumy, we got to go to, that's conflict escalation. And BRICS isn't going to support that. They're not going to stop it. They're not going to sanction Russia. But if you want BRICS to succeed, if you want to build on the success that they just had in Kazan, you don't need to put a poison pill out there. So the West should take advantage of this and start getting down at the table and negotiating based upon the Russian document, December 2021, the new European security framework, and bring this conflict to an end. You'll save a lot of Ukrainian lives, you'll save a lot of Ukrainian territory, and ultimately you'll save Europe and NATO.
Andrei, and in there's somewhat of a poison pill. Scott's right, and I agree with him on everything. Here's one issue, a hump to get over. The issue in the original document, which I read and reported on, wherein a principal concern of Russia was a comprehensive security arrangement with Europe. Let's get this thing done once and for all. Let's not go over this crap over again.
Non-divisible security. This is critical.
Exactly. Now, that being said, meanwhile, the U.S. is, we got to build bases in Sweden. Look what we're doing in Finland. Oh, they may have took this. You know what I mean? They try to play this game. Sure, they might have got Ukraine, but we got Finland and we're over here threatening them, blah, blah, blah. And I suspect Russia is going to say, we're ready to talk. But if you want to talk, we got to talk about this whole thing. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be again, we have to keep in mind also that the process of the admission of Sweden, for example, with its mighty 5,000, brigade, and about the same in Finland, and very little desire to really fight Russians, it was obviously primarily for the political reasons. The military reasoning in NATO has been hollowed out. It seems like, and again, we are dealing with, in the end, let's stop. NATO is euphemism for the United States. United States says to Europe, jump. Europe asks, how high, period. Let's cut this crap. It's United States which runs the show, and Europe are merely, puppets, and they are on the strings which United States pulls. And so in this particular case, they can produce whatever they want, but Russian economy right now, if you look at the real numbers, not this International Monetary Fund BS and all that crap from Wall Street Journal, which they do not understand quantities, they understand money, not money, they understand how to make money out of thin air. But when it comes to the real economy, that is why I say, Chinese economy dwarfs that of the United States. That you have this situation that Russia can counter practically anything NATO or United States will do. And she already did in many respects. And in this case, it's all revolves around this critical point, which is, by the way, in the foundation of the United Nations and things of this nature, which Russia, and again, listen, Russians have a very good international lawyers. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is just the powerhouse of those, guys who know every single letter in every single international document ever written. And non-divisible thing is in the foundation of Russian special military operation. You're absolutely correct. You go into this document on the December 21, 2021. It speaks about it. It's the basically pivot around which everything revolves, non-divisible security. These models have been basically broken. There's no non-divisible security. Now, interesting thing that suddenly major Polish no less, newspapers and media outlet, and they come up and they talk about modus vivendi, how to live, because even they say it's coming to an end. We know. I just spoke about it a couple of days in my video. Poles, can you imagine how Polish elite hates Russians? It's fanatical hatred, okay? And even they say, you know what? How are we going to look into the eyes of Russians after what happened, basically, We have to find modus vivendi. Of course, Russians were offering, but again, we win the circle. We're going to be coming back to this, the consideration of the realities on the ground. And realities on the ground are such that right now there are 2,500 of the armed forces of Ukraine, and a bunch of the, advisors, volunteers from NATO and from Latin America. They are enclosed now. They will be annihilated. Neverskoye Cauldron is being mopped up. It's gone. Kurakhova is next. It's obvious what is happening on the tactical and operational level. And that's what dictates strategic reality. Because indeed, when you As people joke today on my blog, oh, let's repeat Trump's mantra: so much winning, So yeah, that's what is happening. We are sick and tired of winning, And yes, as Scott correctly stated, Russia can continue doing this, steamroller instead of those big, massive, arrows, as long as Russia wants. Because when you look at the economy and what is happening there, my God, many people don't understand that Russia is now beginning to produce next year, which is coming, the serial production of own lithography, for crying out loud. It's just like, wow, it's just, and Russia is covering essentially more than 65% of the necessity of critical chips, such as 365 to 65 nanometer topology. It's like precisely the chips which run the industry and which run the military, And many people still don't understand what is happening. And that is why. So while I agree with Scott, because I totally agree with him, if I would have been NATO, that's what I would have been doing now, The problem is, do we know that Trump administration will do it? I don't know. I think so. Not much will change. They will be all still maneuvering because, as Scott stated, those people, they still cannot comprehend what have happened, because the world is not what it was in 2022. It's completely different world. It's a revolutionary change, and it's the historic event. And it's not only BRICS summit. It's the fact in the end that Russia finally declared itself, which it was, the preeminent military power. Continental military power, and that's what have happened. And many people cannot live with this. Absolutely, it's understandable. But when we go into the Neocon field, which essentially runs the United States, they are militarily incompetent people. Look at these people, for crying out loud, from this Neocon cabal of the ideologues who wouldn't understand the difference between the real tactical and operational. You look at this Kagan's, fraudulent think tank like Institute for Study of War. Russians openly mocking this now. They're laughing. They're laughing at those political science, majors who write those things, and at those generals from Petraeus to King who are in the foundation of this. It's ridiculous. It's like people are just absolutely, are they morons? I have to arrive now to this conclusion that they are, So there's no other way to interpret it. There's just simply, no matter how you try to find excuses, how you try to frame it, but if you do not understand what the 21st century combined arms operation of the scale are, and what kind of the study experience, goes and all that, technology, economy, and things like that. But these are precisely people who miscalculated, and they continue to keep the United States miscalculating time after time after time after time, because they are not able to learn. They really do not have the toolkit. And there you go. And that's what we have right now. So the slow grind will continue, I think. Russians are very comfortable with slow grind.
Scott, let's get back to this buildup on the Russian border, because in the initial demands that Russia wanted to talk about, I'd encourage people to look up December of 2021, and they want the points they wanted to discuss. One of them was getting the NATO infrastructure off of their border going all the way back to 1991 or something, basically saying, look, we don't want you to threaten us on our border. Now, afterwards, I think at some point it became kind of obvious that they were going to lose, and Stoltenberg et al. Said, well, they said they want less NATO, and now we got Finland and Sweden, we're building bases, they're going to get more NATO. Again, an early attempt to save face, maybe looking saying we'll lose this sooner or later, so we got to make a move. That's going to be under discussion. How can at some point they're going to be at a point where they're saying we got to stop this war. Trump's going to be saying if he wins, we ain't sending nothing else. And if the Russians are saying, well, we ain't stopping unless we get the rest of this, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Do you think there are the forces in NATO? Do you think that they could ever get to a point where they say, yeah, we'll roll back? That is a market defeat. If Russia says you got to get the hell off our border, because here's the way it'll come back across, that Russia said, get off our border, we'll kick you off. And they said no, and Russia kicked them off their border. I mean, that's the way it all comes up. Your thoughts on infrastructure, Russia's border, the demands that it backs off, the indivisible security agreement. Is it possible for that to happen, Scott?
Well, I think the Russians wanted to roll back to 1997.
Okay.
Was the 1997 expansion line. First of all, Russia said that, this is our position. And they presented it as a completed agreement. But the Russians never said, take it or leave it. The Russians always said, we want to sit down and have serious discussions. We don't want the discussions to drag out forever, but we want to sit down and have serious discussions. My understanding is that perhaps the most critical aspect of this rollback is to get rid of the anti-ballistic missile sites in Poland and Romania. These are showstoppers for Russia. They view them as threatening their because they're no longer just about anti-ballistic missile. They can be converted into surface-to-surface missile with cruise missile capabilities. And
that's what is this all about. Yeah, it's MK41 BLS.
Yeah, get rid of the Aegis Ashore.
That's what it's all about. Yeah.
And I think Russia now has perhaps one of the strongest negotiating points, because the United States always said, well, it's never about you, Russia. It's about Iran, that rogue nation, Iran. And Russia could come in and say, well, we have a strategic relationship with Iran, and you don't have to worry about them. Okay, so let's stop playing games. It's about us, and you have to get rid of it, or there won't be peace. The other thing is the realization that anti-ballistic missile defense is fake. It doesn't work. And so if Russia was willing, for instance, I can't pretend to know Russian negotiating positions, but Sweden and Finland are NATO members. And I don't think Russia can realistically tell NATO that you can't put troops in NATO countries and you can't do things of that nature. I think if you got rid of the Mark 41 Aegis Ashore and you came up with some sort of modified conventional forces in Europe type agreement on the numbers of troops deployed, et cetera, limiting with agreements about if deployments are made, advance notification, observers, things of this nature.
It existed till relatively recently, this conventional forces of Europe. Then it was abrogated.
And if you do this, I think there's a deal out there ready to be made. I think the Russians, I mean, again, if I were the negotiating team for the United States, I just straight up say, let's go in and knock the knees out from the Russian negotiating position, and let's put Mark 41 on the table, but link it to a strong conventional forces in Europe type treaty that preserves what we have. And now the Russians would come back and say, well, you can't have this big force in Poland, and you got to limit the growth, and there'll be some negotiations going back and forth. But I honestly believe that the Russians so much want those Aegis Ashore gone that they will, as long as whatever infrastructure remains isn't offensive long-range strike related. I think that's it. And then the other thing I wouldn't add to this, but the other thing that I would work out with the Russians, and I think both sides might have an appetite for this, is looking at reducing Russia's tactical nuclear weapons, getting rid of the nuclear weapons in Belarus in exchange for the elimination of the 100 B-61 bombs in NATO's infrastructure, and some sort of control mechanism on British and French submarines. I think that'll have to be treated as a separate issue. But once you start this business of getting back into the business of arms control, which is what a conventional forces in Europe treaty looks like, the attractiveness of this is the amount of money the West is going to save. And this is where it could succeed. Because you see, go back in 2022, who would have thought the German economy would have been deindustrialized and collapsed? I mean, a handful of us predicted it. But I mean, in the West, you're like, the German economy's growing 5.5% growth. They're going to get up to 8%. It's fantastic. The French economy's great. Europe's great. It's wonderful. It's the Russians that can't sustain this. And today it's just the opposite. Europe cannot sustain the economic commitment to this massive NATO growth. And if you play your cards right on the negotiating table, you'll see that the parliaments of various European countries, when they start crunching the dollar signs, are going to say, yeah, this is good. And you have to go through Europe, because the U.S. Congress is full of Russophobes and people who can't think. They have no brains. Literally, they don't even know how to spell arms control. But if Europe makes it that this is a deal we want, and indeed, if Macron has his way, this is a deal we're going to negotiate separate from you, because remember, Russia provided two versions. One was to the United States. The other one was to NATO. And if the United States plays, too hard on this, Russia can negotiate directly with Europe. I don't think that's the route that can happen, but it's a potential. So I just think there's a lot of latitude here for that December 2021 formula to actually gain some traction. I think but it's not going to be a Russia dictates every aspect of this outcome. It's going to be a negotiation where the Russians will have to prioritize what their top things are. I think, knowing the Russians, having spoken a lot with Anatoly Antonov, the man who negotiated the New START treaty and was the man who was pressing for an anti-ballistic missile treaty, or at least new negotiations. According to him, that's one of their top priorities, is to get rid of those sites in Poland and Romania. And today, there's no reason to keep them. They're very expensive. They're very vulnerable. They don't work, and so they just cause political nightmares. So you might have the opportunity for successful negotiations there.
Andrei, your comments on that, but let me add this to it, and I don't know if you got an answer to it. At this point, you've had two Minsk agreements. You've seen the agreement they made with the JCPOA. You're dealing with the devil. Nobody trusts these people. How does Russia get a deal and guarantee? Comments on what Scott said, and you can't trust the neocon. I don't know. Anyway, you see where I'm going, Andrei.
Yeah. Well, and again, coming back to this, the United States is not sovereign in its foreign policy. It is run by many ethnic and religious lobbies. Obviously, the first which comes to mind is Zionists, and they have obviously vast support from the so-called Christian Zionists. That's their power base. But we have other ethnic lobbies. And for example, right now, Scott gives a proper description of the US Congress. It was Ukrainized to the point of that it begins to reflect on almost, you become what you didn't want to, become, but you have become them. And what happens here is Vladimir Putin already stated today. Yeah, I had the chance to look at it in the morning. It's all over the news, and he stated correctly. Yeah, there's no justice in the West. You cannot trust these guys, really. So how you want to approach it? You're going to approach it by the way as to put them in the position when they cannot refuse. So this is exactly what is happening essentially. And at some point of time, reality. Well, it's already biting. Let's face it. It's already biting economically, militarily. And it's just a matter of how hard this vice will be tightened, so how tight this vice with some gonads of NATO will be tightened there, because their gonads are in this vice. And so I agree with Scott on in very many respects. I agree with him. If I would be, some diplomat, or whatever passes for diplomat in the United States today, I would be thinking like that. But the problem is, as I already stated, people write in horror, actually, but I was on record for this for many years, that United States is not governable country. You literally can go and deal with some power pole within Washington, negotiate something, and then the other power pole, just gets into the game and, with the completely opposite aims, and the whole thing just goes kaboom. So that's the problem. Where are the people who you can talk to? And I know for a fact that Mr. Rybkov talked to our common friend, including Larry Johnson, and so the question was, who do we talk to? Show me the people, the statesman who has not only, he could be a jerk, he could be a complete, crap hole, but let him have the power of this person, who can actually maintain some kind of commitment, which is valid. Because as we already saw, for the most part, in the last 20 years, any treaty, which is written, signed with the United States, is not worth the paper it's written on. That's the problem. We have the true credibility problem, and those people now suddenly face this, cognitive dissonance. They cannot do anything militarily, but they have to come up to some kind of the solution which is beyond their fantasies and delusions of the military power. So, what are we going to do? Where we go? I don't know. Elections might change something. If Trump comes to power, as much as I will be, obviously, we will be voting Republican, no doubt about it. But we'll be doing it this way, okay? We'll come to the poll, just vote for Trump, and said, what, screw that, because the alternative is much worse. But will he be able to do anything about it? Did he learn something? I don't know. Neither does Moscow. J.D. Vance may say whatever he wants, but it is always now in the United States in the last 20 years that they proclaim one thing and do the opposite, so there you go. So we have this issue. It's a serious issue. I don't know how to overcome it, honestly. I don't have a solution.
I would just add this. If Trump excuse me, guys, I'm a little under the weather here. If Trump surrounds himself with the establishment people, we're screwed, because there's no one in the establishment that's trained to negotiate today. None. And I mean that from the top to the bottom. There's a Mr. Mizin. I don't want to butcher his first name, but he's a former Russian diplomat, arms controller. I think it's Andrei Mizin. He said a long time ago, he wrote a great article, and he said that we haven't had meaningful arms control negotiations with the Russians since 2010, and that the muscle memory that existed is gone. All the people that gave us the great arms control treaties, I helped, they're out, they're gone. We don't have anybody that does that, and we have nobody that knows how to do it. Not only that, we have nobody that wants to do it. We yielded arms control from the State Department to the military, and they're all about war fighting, not arms control. And even the Russians, he said the same thing's happening with the Russians. We don't have the muscle memory anymore. But as Andrei did allude earlier, the Russian foreign ministry is one of the most robust and resilient foreign policy institutions in the world. And if anybody can relearn how to do something, the Russians can. Trump has spoken about taking advantage of Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. If he does this, if he, for instance, tells RFK Jr., you've got the Russia portfolio, in Tulsi, you've got defense arms control. Now there might be the start, because they'll start to recruit people that don't come from the establishment, but people who are like thinkers. And we have to break the mold. We have to do it completely different. We can't make the same mistake of 2016, bringing Trump in, who's going to rock the establishment, then he staffs it with establishment people. If you're going to rock the establishment, in order to get the kind of changes we're talking about, these negotiations, we need whole new people who are willing, and the Russians might actually trust those people. Because right now, if I bring in my standard State Department diplomat, cookie cutter person, they don't trust them. They don't trust the system. We're going to have to re-earn this trust. And that's one of the things that the Russians have made clear. I mean, Anatoly Antonov said, you thought your treaties in the past, because if you take a look at when we start, when we were negotiating, my hands are here, the START treaties here, START 2, START 3. But then George W. Bush came in and he came up with SORT's this thick. It's not a treaty. It's sort of an agreement. It's sort of like a casual thing. No verification, no nothing. New START's a little bit thicker, but it's there. Anatoly Antonov said that if we are to enter into a new phase of negotiations, understand the treaties are going to be this thick, and you are going to be held to, I mean, both sides will be, but we're going to insist on very stringent guarantees and checks, because we don't trust you, and we can't trust you, and we can't enter into this line of negotiation with you and find ourselves to have been lied to like we were with New START. New START was an absolute lie. Anatoly Antonov admits that he was fooled by Rose Guttmuller and the American negotiating team. The B-52 counting, the Trident counting, he was lied to. that he was promised that there would be an ABM treaty negotiation process once the Senate ratified New START. He was lied to. And he says, we don't trust you. And it's not just a matter of personal insult. Institutionally, Russia can't trust the United States because we're talking about existential survival. We're talking about how the United States uses arms control negotiations to achieve strategic advantage. And Russia will not yield strategic advantage through a negotiation process anymore. So if we're able to get back on that track, we have to have new blood. And one of the first indicators will be what Trump, if Trump wins, what Trump does with his transition team and what he does with Bobby Kennedy and what he does with Tulsi Gabbard. And frankly speaking, what he does with J.D. Vance, meaning giving J.D. Vance a portfolio to run. And then his willingness, and this is so hard for Trump, to sit back and let them run. Because Trump is an egomaniac, a narcissist. He's he micro-controls everything. But at least if he's trying to micro-control people who want peace and are moving in that direction, maybe we have a chance. But if he brings back Mike Pompeo, it's over.
Oh, it's over because they'll kill him on the spot. And anyway, one last thing. I know you got to go, Andrei, but I did want to ask you an important question. This is me. This is something I've been wondering, and I know you it's something you can answer. So I know you got to go, but
no, I have 5-10 minutes. It's fine.
Okay, good. Here's the question. The so-called intel leak, Israel's planning on attacking Iran. We hear that the Russians have been helping Iran with their defensive capabilities, blah, blah, blah. And my thought was this: the worst thing, possible thing that could happen for Israel and its masters in Washington is to send some F-35s and missiles in and get them all shot down. How good, how extensive, how good is Iran's air defense, missile defense capabilities? How much do you think it's been built up by Russia? How hard would it be at this point for the Israelis to launch air/missile attacks on Iran? Would it fail? Would it be successful? Your thoughts?
Oh, Scott, last time we got together, he actually beautifully described this whole thing, which is the fuel train, because you have to have those tankers out there. And then you have to look at the airspace, which you have to cross. Well, there is a rumor now that Saudi Arabia and Iran are preparing joint naval exercise. You gotta be kidding me. I'm pinching myself here. So, but the point is, yes, Israel can launch missiles. Obviously, Russia will warn, because Russia has the second best early warning system. In some aspects, it's actually better in terms of the anti-missile capabilities. Iran will know in advance the launch. They will know the launch. They will know. They will be given the tracks, and they will be given actually the arrival. Russians can calculate that. So they will be ready. They have, it's not exactly knockoffs, but definitely type of copies of the air defense systems, ranging from Iranian version of Asa, Iranian version of Buk M1. They do have some versions of the S-300, I think so, with some help from North Korea. I think so. They have been exchanging some kind of the critical data. Even North Koreans provided some technical assistance, because North Korea does produce sort of like knockoffs of S-300. And actually, they had also access to the Israeli, so-called Israeli technology. I'm talking about North Koreans. But Russia definitely is providing a critical support in terms of the early warning, which is huge in case of the attack. And yeah, if they want to try those F-35s, I don't even know what Russia delivered to Iran, okay? I really don't. I mean, there are flights. A regular S-400, you can stick it into the basically Antonov 124. It's going to take about a couple of Antonov 124 flights to deliver the basically the battery of the S-400. And I think so. They definitely do have some kind of integration there of the air defense, unlike it was this year. Remember this pathos written statements like, "Oh yeah, Iraqi, it's very well integrated." When you look at the air defense in Iraq, it was from during the Civil War in the United States, 1861. So, I don't know, they were integrating there with those optronic, the optical fiber optic cables. But Iran definitely on the order of magnitude much more sophisticated in this respect. Plus, it is much larger. So you will have, for Israel, unless, of course, again, Israel launches the missiles, Iranians will know that they are ready to launch, and they will know, as I already stated, they're essentially targeting pure aircraft, as I already stated. Scott beautifully described it, last time. And if they have people with Su-35s, who knows? Are they there in Iran? But they say the first two arrived as far back as, I don't know, half a year or so. So who knows? Very difficult to, get any reliable information on that. But let's put it this way: Russians wouldn't mind, shooting down F-35s. So they track them all the time. They know everything there is to know about them because they are sitting there at Khmeimim base. Su-35s and Su-57s even track them. They follow them. They know their signatures. They know everything they need to know. So I think so we can encounter yet another extension, so to speak, of the American, in this case, Israeli military technology failing there. But yeah, they certainly can do the damage, no doubt about it.
Scott, on the defensive capabilities of Iran and the so-called intel leak, I personally feel that was crap, that they just put that out. That's not a leak, but it could be. I don't know. Anyway, Scott and Andrei, if you have to go, I understand. I'm just going to get this last question from Scott.
Yeah, guys, I really have to go, and you know what? It was pleasure as always. So anytime, guys. So
all right.
Bye-bye.
All right, thanks.
All right. Last question here, Scott. Your thoughts
Smoothie
on
X12.
Yeah, there we go.
Best OnlyFans page in the
yeah. Last question.
Yeah, my feeling about the intelligence documents is that they look real. Just the way they're structured. When I went through it, it all makes sense. It's what I would expect a document of that nature to how it would be structured. But I did say that that this document wasn't leaked officially, that this was something that somebody did on their own initiative, and they will be caught. And I think they will be. I don't know if the person whose name has been put out there is the actual perpetrator, or just somebody that they're politically throwing out because she has an Iranian background. But the documents, each document that's released like that has a unique identifier to it that helps counterintelligence find out who was in possession of the original version, and it helps with tracing. The interesting thing about that is one of the things, going back to my Gulf War experience, I did play a peripheral role in the planning and monitoring of major strike packages that went into Iraq. And so when I looked at the target or the weapons mix that was being prepared, two primary kinds of air-launched ballistic missiles, what they call the Rocks and what they call Golden Horizon. The Golden Horizon appears to be what is known as the Blue Sparrow. The Sparrow series of missiles were started out there as a Black Sparrow and a Silver Sparrow. These were target missiles. Black Sparrow was developed after the Gulf War to simulate Iraqi Scud missiles, the advanced extended versions, so that Israeli air defense could practice shooting it down. The Silver Sparrow was designed to replicate the Shahed-3, the Iranian liquid fuel missile. The Blue Sparrow took the Silver Sparrow's operational attributes, upgraded it, and turned it into an offensive weapon that has considerable range. Apparently, it can go up to 1,200 miles. And they were preparing 16 of these. They were also preparing 40 Rocks. The Rock has a lesser range of between 300 and 500 miles, depending on where it's done. They apparently fired some Rocks against Iran back in April 19th. The Rock uses a Blue Sparrow booster, and they found a Blue Sparrow booster in a field south of Baghdad. which shows, so then you reverse engineer and you've got a weapons release somewhere in Western Iraq. So they released the weapon in Western Iraq, booster separation over Baghdad, and then the weapons flew in and hit radar sites in Isfahan. So based upon past practice, what you're looking at here is a strike package that is built around taking out approximately 20 discrete air defense targets. Not necessarily the missiles, but the radars, because that's the important thing. You disable the radars and you can carve a gap. And then, so 40 rocks, 20 radar sites, you carve a gap, and then 16 Blue Sparrows or Golden Horizon follow up for a deep strike, probably into Tehran. That's my reading, because you link that up with the political statements made by Benjamin Netanyahu about to the Iranian people, saying, look, we just killed Hassan Nasrallah. We're going to get the Hamas leadership, and we're coming after your leadership. And when your leadership's gone, you will be liberated. So he was all but saying, we're coming to kill your leadership. And so I believe that that intelligence document actually provided the bare bones for understanding what a Israeli strike against Iranian leadership targets in and around Tehran. Now, it could also be against Iranian military targets. And the Parchin ballistic missile plant, you have a couple other critical missile facilities. So if you just wanted to limit it to missiles, there's like 3 places you could hit in around Tehran. In the Gulf War, we opened up the war by bringing in B-52 bombers from Barksdale, Louisiana. They fired 35 conventional air launch cruise missiles that struck 8 targets in the vicinity of Taji, which is a military facility north of Baghdad. This Israeli force structure reminds me a lot of that. And what it does is it doesn't require the Israeli aircraft to penetrate Iranian airspace, which is a plus. The other thing is the April 3rd or the April 19th attack appeared to have come in over Lebanon, penetrated into southern Syria, using strikes against Syrian radars as a cover, and then other aircraft came in and made their attack over Western Iraq before returning. Every day, the Israelis are flying strike packages, extensive strike packages into Lebanon and into Syria. And some of these strike packages involve a lot of airplanes. For instance, dropping those 85 2,000-pound bombs on Nasrallah's bunker. That was a large strike. To fire these 56 air-launched ballistic missiles, you're probably looking at around 36 aircraft, probably F-15Is. Maybe some of the rocks would be fired by F-16Is. But these air-launched ballistic missiles won't fit inside the weapons bay of an F-35. So the F-35s will probably be used as air cover, combat cover. But again, these aircraft aren't going to get that close to the Iranian border. So I don't think the capabilities of the S-400s, the S-300s, and the modern Iranian air defense systems are going to be engaged with Israeli aircraft. Now the question is, will they be able to shoot down these air-launched ballistic missiles? And a lot depends on queuing. The Israelis are pretty good. We should never denigrate the Israelis, even though if we don't agree with them, we at least need to, the last thing you ever want to do is disrespect your enemy, because they have a tendency to come back and kick your ass. And the Israelis are very good at what they do, especially their Air Force. They're very well trained. They have great equipment. They have great weapons, and they know how to plan these attacks. And so there's a lot of planning going on. But this leak is a game changer. This is why I believe the story that came out today that the Israelis said we have to cancel our attack against Iran because of this leak. Because there's no way, if I were a military planner with that information out there, there's just too much. If that's true, there's too much the Iranians can do to prepare for that. And you're only going to get one shot, because what's going to happen is you're going to come in and you're going to hit them. And if you don't take out the leadership targets, or you're not going to get a second shot. Iran now is going to blanket Israel with ballistic missiles. What the Israelis are hoping is if they take out leadership, that they can ride out the first Iranian missile strike, but then Iran will collapse from within. They're operating under the premise that the Islamic, the Islamic theocracy is fragile, and that if you take out Khamenei, you take out the Republican Guard leadership, and et cetera, that there will be revolts in the street, and then Iran will collapse. That's what they tried to do in September of 2023, and they're going to try it again. This is the Israeli plan from my perspective, but the leak of this document was fatal to that plan, because you only get one shot. And now they're also talking about covert drone capability, which means that the Israelis were going to have drones over Tehran, picking out targets. What's important about the drones is you're looking for movable targets, relocatable targets, so you can launch the attack and look at leadership moving and adjust the attack to hit the leadership. Again, now the Iranians can do things to prepare for that and disrupt this attack or defeat the attack, and that would be devastating for the Israelis. If they're going to do this, they get one shot, and I think that window is closed at this point in time. So I think we're not going to be looking at an Israeli strike against Iran until after the election.
Before we go, Scott, can you find it? Wait a minute. Oh, there we go. Let's take a look at this. This weekend, we got big things going up. Scott, tell us about it.
Well, on Saturday night, there's an event held by Diane Sayre and Jose Vega, and you can go to I think Sayre Vega Peace or something. If you type in their names, you'll find it. And I was invited to speak there, and I think Garland, you were as well. Mm-hmm. And I took one look at the people that were there, and I said, if any of them are spending the night in New York City, why not do a brunch event the next day? And I had a friend who has a fantastic steakhouse, the Tudor City Steakhouse, agreed to make it available. So we're putting on a brunch from 10 a.m. until approximately 1:30 p.m. World-class brunch. Look at the lineup of speakers. Jimmy Dore, I don't know who that Ritter guy is, but Judge Napolitano, Garland Nixon, Randy Credico, Russa Dobelar, Dennis Fritz, Danny Haifong, Jeff Norman, Diane Sayre, Jose Vega, Larry Wilkerson. We're going to have 3 powerhouse panels. The threat of nuclear war, the assault on free speech, and saving democracy. This is world-class dialogue that's going to be taking place. And there's 120 seats. If you go to scottritter.com, the last I checked, we had 20 tickets left. So if you want to go, you should go and get the tickets. They're available on the site. This is going to be a very an invaluable gathering, and we're going to give away these Operation Dawn challenge coins too, so that someday down the road, if I ever meet you in a bar and I know you bought one of these or I gave you one of these and I put it on the bar and you don't have it, you have to buy me a beer. That's just the way it works with challenge coins. But no, this is going to be a great event. We're going to record it, so those who can't make it, we will be broadcasting the different panels on different forums. I mean, I call this a family of podcasts. So Garland will get copies of it. He can stream it if he wants to. Danny Haifong, Jimmy Dore, Judge Napolitano. We're going to get it out there so that we achieve the goal and objective of empowering people with knowledge and information. But it's a world-class event, world-class panels. Sunday, October 27th from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And scottritter.com. You can go there and buy tickets.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. Certainly appreciate that, everybody. So let me see if I can figure out. Oh, there we go. How to stop the screen. It's they were calling me, asking me for tech advice on how to stream it. And I'm like, I'll do the best I can, but I'm okay with that stuff. But I'm not exactly the tech guy. But at any rate, Scott, well, thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, go to scottritter.com. To find out about the event in New York City. Also, you can see all of Scott's good works there. Click around all the stuff you can find, articles, video commentaries, you name it, scottritter.com. And of course, while you're there, make sure that you support Scott. Make sure that you donate, because Scott, it's important to keep this stuff going, and it's very expensive, and everybody here's got to live. Also, share scottritter.com on all your social media networks. Scott and I and people like us are all, oftentimes we are, let's just say, held back from the full reach that we should have. So go to scottritter.com, make sure you donate. If you're in the area, make sure you get in New York, there's the seats are going fast. So make sure you move on. Thanks a lot, Scott. And look forward to talking to you again soon, and look forward to hanging out this weekend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Hey, everybody, share this on all your social media platforms. Don't forget, you got the Patreon stuff there. Sputnik is closed, so it would certainly be a benefit to me if you were able to either through Patreon, buy me a coffee, whatever, PayPal, you name it. If you are able to donate to the channel, I certainly would appreciate it. Share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot. We're out.